Hello everybody, here we are today and we're going to be doing our Western semi-final preview between the Calgary Stampeders and the BC Lions. So before we get into it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or the CFL, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So this will be the second game of the start of the playoffs, and of course this is a big one as it is a rematch of last year. This time around it feels a little different as the Lions are 12-6 and the Stampeders were just able to make it into the playoffs at 6-12. So it's going to be at BC Place. It's going to be hopefully a good crowd. It seems like there's a lot of talk about the upper deck being opened up. So yeah, we have that. That being said, what are some storylines to look at going into this game? So the first thing is Calgary can't get buried early. This is something that is going to be really important for them if they want to be able to win this game. The first two games that they played out of the three games this year, they ended up kind of getting behind early and then weren't able to do what they wanted to do. The second game was especially true, final score being 37-9. In both of those games, they were never able to run the ball probably the way they would have liked to, and they just didn't have great days overall. The third game was completely different though. They were able to run the ball a ton, ended up getting a big win, and it was just one of those deals where they needed to win and they were able to establish the run. All good things. On top of that, you can't really have interceptions and you can't have fumbles. I know that sounds kind of silly, but you got to make sure that the silly mistakes don't happen, and you got to make sure that your drives to start out are good drives. If you go out there in your first 2, 3, 4 drives or punts, you very well could see BC build up that early lead that they would like to do. Next thing you know, you're not playing the game you want to play and you're trying to play catch-up, something you don't really want to be doing against the Lions. The second thing is Jake Maier can be quiet. The first two games that these two teams played against each other, again, they kind of were buried a little bit early and things changed probably where they wouldn't have liked them to change. And Maier ended up having two bad games. The first game was pretty bad. I think the second game wasn't all that great either. Both of them finished with 0 touchdown passes, if I'm not mistaken, and an interception apiece. And one of those situations, there was a lot of passing attempts, a lot of passing, or not a lot of passing yards, and not a lot of points. The third game didn't see a lot of attempts, didn't see a lot of yards, but did see a lot of points. My mindset here is Calgary would at least like to be able to run the ball somewhat, but they're going to need Maier to be able to step up and perform. He is viewed as the guy that was here to replace Bo Levi Mitchell. Bo took them to multiple Grey Cups and they won multiple Grey Cups. Maier, for the better part of 2 years now, has not been, a guy that was a top tier guy. And this year he looked kind of bad at points. And it's just a situation now that I do think not only is he playing for his future, but if the Stampeders are not able to pass the ball at all, or at least somewhat, do you realistically think they're going to be heading to Winnipeg with a good ground game? They need this passing game to work a little bit. Maier, obviously the guy that's going to be throwing the ball to make that happen, so you really would like to see him do well. And then maybe next year, regardless of what happens in the playoffs, you could say, well, Maier should be our guy going forward. The thing for the Lions that they should look out for is whether or not they can put pressure on Maier. And BC, obviously a team with Matthew Betts having 18 sacks in a season, are well suited to be able to get after the quarterback. They finished with 55 sacks total. Now granted, obviously the sack numbers ended up dropping off after Betts' 18, but third best in the league, if I'm not mistaken, might have been second best behind Toronto. I think it actually was second best, and that is something you'd like to see, be able to get pressure on quarterbacks. And in fact, I think I read on the CFL website that Betts actually led the league for most pressures. And if I'm mistaken on that, I do apologize, but the point remains. Obviously, they're able to get and take down quarterbacks, whereas Calgary, I believe, had the third fewest sacks allowed this season. Last year it was first in the sense that you didn't allow a lot of sacks. That is terrific news, and Calgary's offensive line is going to have to play well here. There was a point where they played Toronto, and I think Bell was their left tackle. Ended up not going too well there with Flora and Ormalade. But in general, again, getting everybody back, I haven't seen the depth charts just yet, would be big for this one. If the Stamps are able to give Maier some time, that's probably going to be pivotal here. Because like I've said, I feel like I had a lot of optimism for the Stampeders receiving core going into this season. And then some guys left, some guys got injured, and some guys underperformed. So for me, my biggest worry is whether or not they're going to be able to get separation against a BC defense that has looked really good at stretches this year. Almost all-time good in some smaller stretches, just stretches in general. But yeah, if they're not able to get separation and Maier's under a lot of duress, you're relying on a run game. And again, we already know what my opinion is. If the Stamps are looking to get to Winnipeg, you can't just get there by running the ball. Unless, Kadeem Carey, Peyton Logan, and Mills are all going for, 4 or 5 yards to carry or more. So Maier being protected is going to be the pivotal moment here. And I do think in the trenches, as cliche it is, you're going to need to be able to see whether or not BC can get after him. And then my final talking point before I make my pick is, does Calgary's defense have reason to be concerned a little bit? So the Stampeders on paper were a team that I was just really excited about. I thought that their offense had a lot of potential. I thought their defense had a lot of potential, and things didn't work out, obviously. Their defense ended up allowing the third most points per game, and I think part of that was the offense just going out there and underperforming, and even in some games where they probably should have been blowing out some bad teams, forcing them to have to punt the ball. Defense is out there, defense is more exhausted, and when you're more exhausted, you're more liable to, let that guy slide past you a little bit further. Maybe you don't tackle as well as you should have. The reality is the Stampeders struggled again with the Lions, and my biggest concern for Calgary in this game with a Lions offense that is really dangerous is the fact that in all three of these games you had some guys, you had Hatcher, you had Rhymes, you had McInnes, that all had big games in this, and there's more guys to worry about that are on this roster in the receiving core. So it's like, what do you really do if you can't say this is the one guy we have to stop? I have been in that situation before, and I'm sure you guys have had to as well. If you played a really good team, it's not just stopping one guy. There's suddenly 5 guys that you would probably say if they were on a bad team, they would be the guy that you would want to stop. Reality is Calgary's got to figure out something here. I don't know exactly what the coverage is going to look like, but that will probably decide whether or not they win this game. So overall, what are my thoughts here? Well, the answer is really simple. The Stampeders cannot have a replica of Game 2, where Keon Hatcher, I believe in the first quarter, first half, was just lighting them up, finding a ton of separation, and the Stamps were buried early. Like I said earlier, you can't go down by double-digit points and then try to make a comeback in the playoffs. I mean, you can, but it's not the way you want to do things. With BC being the way that they aren't afraid to air the ball out and take chances. And with them being in BC place, where you don't have to worry about the weather, it really does benefit the Lions, which are more of the skill team, if you want to say. Calgary probably would have loved to have this game be out in the weather. Situation is what it is, and the Stamps have to play underdogs. That being said, what is my pick for this game? I am picking the Lions, not really as a biased Lions fan, just because I feel like the Stampeders really never gained momentum. It was just Saskatchewan lost all their momentum to make the playoffs, and BC has had a lot of good momentum for most of the year. There was a little bit of a bad stretch, but in general, the offense is really good. The defense is really good. Sean White obviously been having a really good year. So I think that the Lions are going to beat the Stampeders in the playoffs yet again in the Western Semi-Final. We will see, though. What are your thoughts on this game? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. And then please make sure to check out my other previews for this playoffs. Everybody, please make sure to stay safe and have a great night.